What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Geek Pantheon. I am Eric, and today we have a how-to run for Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen. First and foremost, huge thank you to Wizards of the Coast for sending me this copy of Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen, so I can do stuff like this for you before the book comes out, so you know before you get your hands on this through watching my previous review video and these videos, if this is the adventure for you, if you're going to enjoy running it, and if you do decide to, my tips and tricks on how I would run this. So one thing straight out of the gate is this is part 1 of 2 for how to run Dragonlance the Shadow Queen. Those of you that have been around on the channel for a while know that I typically do these type of things for Candlekeep Mysteries, the shorter, more anthology style adventures that the adventure covers a dozen pages or maybe 20 to 30 pages as opposed to over 100 pages, which is what this covers. And trying to cram all of that into one video would be an extremely long video or an extremely superficial video. So I wanted to make sure that I could do justice to this adventure and be able to give you all the level of coverage that I want to be able to give you when it comes to how to run this adventure. So let's get into it. Okay, we're going to kick things off with chapter 2 of the book titled Prelude to War. So the first thing that I want to highlight here is look at the adventure flow, look at the adventure breakdown. A lot of people are going to be quick to skip these pages. Don't, if for no other reason than when you look at the adventure flow and the breakdown of each chapter, chapter 2 preludes, chapter 3 when home burns, chapter 4 shadow of war, etc. They do a really good job, especially on the bigger chapters, where the first paragraph is here's what's happening in this chapter from a narrative beat standpoint. Here's what's going on. The second paragraph is the goal or intention of that chapter when it comes to what's going to happen in the adventure and how it relates to the adventure. So for example, chapter 3, When Home Burns, the first paragraph, the characters come to the village of Vogler to attend the funeral of a friend and to participate in the Kingfisher Festival, a local tradition. During the festival, a reenactment of a legendary battle goes awry when treacherous mercenaries attack. This ambush foreshadows a greater attack by the dragon army. The characters must help the people of Vogler escape the village before the red dragon army overwhelms them. That is what's happening in this chapter. The second paragraph, encourage the characters to forge connections to each other and to the earnestly hospitable people of Vogler. Many of the people the characters meet here will be their allies throughout the adventure, and the characters should have developed a relationship with the community by the time the dragon army attacks. That is the intention and the goal and what you should have in mind as the dungeon master when you're running this adventure. So here's what's happening. Second paragraph, here's what we're going to try to accomplish in this adventure. Developing a strong relationship with the people of Vogler so that when the dragon army attacks, that is emotionally resonant for the players and their characters. I like that. I think it's a very smart way to lay out this adventure flow, and don't skip over it. Okay, some general thoughts on the Dragon Queen's threat section of this chapter, getting into, once again, this is information for the adventure as a whole. Treat the Draconians as horror movie monsters, like otherworldly threats. These should be things that terrify and confound the player characters, and you should communicate them in that way. These are enemies that they have never come across anything like this before. And in fact, the closest thing they look like is humanoid-esque dragons, which dragons should also be a terrifying thing at this stage in the world. So ramp up your description on the Draconians, their mannerisms, their terrifying nature. Hammer that home early and often anytime they encounter them. Secondly, the actual villain of this adventure, which is Consaldi Fire Eyes. With every encounter, hype up Consaldi. Actually, let me look at the pronunciation guide, see if I'm pronouncing Consaldi Fire Eyes. Consaldi. Got it. So hype up Consaldi anytime the player characters take a prisoner. They should be spouting some dogmatic, cultish nonsense about how Consaldi is going to burn them with their crimson eyes and yada, yada, yada. So just constantly have Consaldi be the puppet master and the one driving what's going on. And then additionally with Lord Soth is an interesting entity in this adventure, in that he is not the big bad villain. That's Consaldi, but he's also obviously not an ally, and the player characters like are directly in conflict with Lord Soth early on in the fourth chapter, which is the tail end of what we're going to be covering today. Lord Soth is the one that shows up and has a direct and meaningful impact on the player characters' lives, yet he is not the big bad, and he's not who the player characters are ultimately going to fight at the end of this adventure. So Lord Soth is an interesting one in how you handle him. One way that I think would be interesting to really drive home the influence and the impact of a figure like Lord Soth without putting him in direct conflict with the player characters is if you are using the Warriors of Krynn board game to run the mass combat, which I think that you should if you get the deluxe version, if you get a copy of Warriors of Krynn. I think that makes this adventure feel special and feel different from every other D&D adventure, and I would recommend that. But if you do that, if you run the mass combat rules and the player characters lose a battle, which is entirely possible, maybe have Lord Soth be the reason they lose. Like, play the game as normal, but when it's clear the players have lost, then as you describe the scene and the routing of the player character's army, have Lord Soth and his knights be the ones that show up and rout the player character's army. Have him be this persistent threat that is always out of reach of the player characters, but very clear that they never want to be within reach of Lord Soth. So I think those could be some interesting ways. Or if it's your DM style to also include things like third-person cutscenes, like cut away from the players, show what the villains are up to, you could also utilize that in terms of really ramping up the threat that Lord Soth is. Okay, and getting into the actual Prelude adventures. When you're looking at the Broken Silence one, which is the one for more God-focused characters, your clerics, your paladins, or just a player character of any class that is religious and worships a god devoutly, you could run this kind of how it's shown in the book as a group encounter thing. But I think it would be much more interesting to take the bones of the Broken Silence with like the broken statue that is filled in by this twilight. The art on the page does a good job of conveying what the imagery in this adventure should ultimately look like. But make it more personalized based on the god. Maybe have individual scenes for each of these characters. And if you flip back to the beginning of the book, you have descriptions of all the different gods in this setting, what they're like, what their domains of influence are, and maybe change the set dressing. Still have the actual beats be the same from player character to player character because it's the gods waking up, and so that can have some uniformity and continuity, but make the trappings of it distinct to that god. I think that can make this feel a little bit more special and a little less cookie cutter standardized, if that makes sense. I totally get why they would offer a standardized version because page count is a real thing when you're publishing a book like this, but I think as a DM, if you're going to flesh it out further, that'd be a really cool way to do it. Eyes in the Sky, which is the one for mage characters, which leads them down the path of joining the high sorcery organization. Maybe do it as a group, but work with the players to come up with a backstory justification. Did you all train together, or did you all receive visions that just led you to this same place, same time kind of thing? But work with them to figure out, why are you all here together? And I would personally err more for a concrete reason of like, we study together, we train together, we have the same arcane mentor, etc. I think that just has a bit more traction and provides a good interconnective tissue between player characters for your party for the adventure moving forward. And additionally, for the Scales of War, you're coming face to face with Draconians. Have them be horrifying. Just once again, like I said before, ramp it up and really get descriptive with how you visualize them and how you describe their movements and their attacks. Make them horror movie monsters. That's my big thing with Scales of War. Additionally, if you have player characters that fit both the Broken Silence and the Eyes in the Sky, and you're going to run both of those, and that covers all your player characters, I would then also run Scales of War. Have that be on the road towards Vogler, and then you have everybody experiencing the Draconians together, and that can be this first kind of galvanizing moment for the player characters to join together. Also, I don't know if it's Vogler or Vogler. I'm going with Vogler. I think that's right, looking at the pronunciation guide, but if not, sue me. Okay, now we are getting into chapter 3, When Home Burns. Look at the pretty art. I like the art in this book. It's very good. So When Home Burns, take your time. Take your time. I'm going to read it one more time. Take your time from the initial arrival to the funeral to the festival. Don't rush any of the party's time in Vogler. Like the adventure flow section said, this is the time for the players to care about this town. And if you rush through trying to get to the good parts, the attacks and the combats and things like that, you're going to be letting down that aspect of the adventure. This section of the adventure needs time to breathe. And I know that seems, it's the beginning of the adventure. You want them to be in action, having fun, which is why I would recommend Scales of War for everyone. So you have that initial combat encounter, the scary thing, the kind of cold open of the movie before we go to the Shire for a bit and just, hang out, get to know people in the town, go to a festival, etc. until the big betrayal that happens during the reenactment of the battle. Then that kind of bumps up the tension, and then obviously things continue to rise from there. But the longer you take in Vogler, the greater the payoff will be at the end of the chapter. Within reason, obviously you don't want it to drag for like 10 sessions of just puttering around the town and your players are like, what the heck is happening? Why is this taking so long? But I mean, I wouldn't be afraid of having an entire session of the party going around shopping, getting to know people in the town, just role playing, social encounters, that kind of thing. Don't be afraid of something like that. And then maybe have halfway through that next session be the reenactment where the betrayal happens, and you can then the action kind of falls down again, but there's higher tension, and then you can go from there. Lord Baracus in the adventure as written does not get properly introduced until you all get to Kalaman, which I honestly think is a mistake. I would introduce him earlier on, and it mentions that it mentions his home in the little Vogler Gazetteer. And it mentions, he's a jerk to the townspeople, and the West Side House, that's where he lives. And he puts down, throws his money around and treats the villagers like yokels. Show that, have that happen. Introduce Lord Baracus in that context to the player characters when they're in Vogler wandering around, potentially his son as well. You could have a son with him and they're both treating some villager poorly, and the player characters can intervene if they want. And if they do, I guarantee you whatever villager that they were putting down is going to become a party favorite, probably because they have invested time in protecting this person, and that can give you some tragic ammunition later in the adventure when the town gets attacked, if you're playing that kind of game where we protected this person from bullying and then the dragon army killed them. Be sad. Anyway, Becklin, that is the Knight of Solamnia that the party meets in the final farewell section after they've had time to chill in the town, all that kind of stuff. When you're ramping up to the funeral, they meet with Becklin Uthveharen, and Becklin is your Obi-Wan of this adventure. She is the one that has the understanding of the wider world. And granted, she has a much more optimistic view of the past than Obi-Wan does. It's like if Obi-Wan thought the Clone Wars were cool and misses the days of the Jedi being super cool, general, intergalactic superstars, which Obi-Wan obviously is not that way. But you get what I'm saying. She is the older mentor. She is the one that can kind of guide the player characters through the world. And more importantly, Darrett as well, who you will meet later on in this section. But yeah, I would portray her and have her serve that function early on, because once again, removing that character from the hero is a coming of age moment, is a big milestone moment when you're talking about the hero's journey and all that kind of stuff. And so establishing Becklin as that, so that then you can remove her at the end of this chapter, follows those beats and gives your adventure and your campaign a stronger narrative feel when you're hitting those story beats. At the funeral, it talks about Becklin sharing some stories about Ispin Greenshield. Prepare those. Have a couple in your back pocket prepared, ready to go. Don't try to wing something like that. Have it be meaningful. Have it be, have it reinforce the player character's ideas of who Ispin was so that they can chime in and laugh along. Don't do something that's like subversion. Like if they all decided that Ispin was this very kind, gentle person, you're talking about him like murdering people, that's going to create some cognitive dissonance. So reinforce the player character's idea of who Ispin was. And then additionally, I would make the PC's stories about Ispin part of session 0 / backstory creation. I would give it to them as homework at the end of session 0. Like, by the way, for the first couple sessions, I'm not sure when it'll come up, but you all are obviously traveling to this town for a funeral. Come up with a story of your interaction with the deceased Ispin. Come up with something like that, write it down, have it ready, because at the funeral there will be opportunity to share stories, and I would like you all to share your stories of Ispin there. Be transparent with him. Tell him, this is what I want. This is the moment that I want. Please prepare for that. And in my experience, players will rise to that occasion when you ask them. When Baracus the Younger heckles at the funeral, it has a check involved where when you confront him, and I'm just going to read what it says, because I might be misreading it, but a character who confronts Baracus the Young, or Baccharis the Young. I've been saying Baracus this whole time. I even wrote Baracus in my notes. Baccharis. Lord Baccharis, Baccharis the Younger. Man, I was doing so well. Baccharis. Baccharis the Younger, a character who confronts Baccharis the Younger can convince him to stay quiet by role-playing or succeeding on a DC 12, charisma, intimidation, or persuasion. After any confrontation, Baccharis the Younger scoffs and complains that no one in Vogler can take a joke, then leaves of his own volition. It says after any confrontation, so maybe the check doesn't need to succeed. Just having the check in there confused me as to what, like, if he's going to leave after any confrontation, then what function does the check serve? If he's going to say his quip and leave. So maybe just have the check determine his attitude as he leaves, whether he sulks away with his tail between his legs, or he's really haughty and feels like he got the better end of that interaction. Do it that way. Just have it affect his attitude. I don't know why the check was included, because it doesn't seem to have any real impact on what happens in the interaction. And then next up, after the funeral, when you all go to meet Darrett, once again, I'm hitting the points where I want to emphasize something. I'm not covering every beat of the adventure, just because that would take a very long time. And this is a pretty well-written adventure. There's some sections that I don't need to provide my input, like meeting Cudgel. Meeting Cudgel is great. I don't have a whole lot of input there. And also because Cudgel doesn't serve a whole lot. Cudgel is a fine character, but they're not as narratively important, at least to my reading, as characters like Becklin and Darrett. So if I skip something and you're like, hey, why didn't you talk about this? That's why. I think it's done really well, and I don't think it really needs any emphasis. So anyway, when you meet Darrett, portray Darrett as very naive and starstruck to the player characters, to Becklin, to everyone. Like, have him be that Act 1 young hero in the making, so that his growth over the course of the adventure is that much more noticeable. Have him be this wide-eyed, wants to be a hero, so that when he finally grows into being that hero, that's an impactful moment, and the player characters can feel like they've had a hand in molding this young man into the knight that he eventually becomes. Okay, the festival. More importantly, the reenactment of the Battle of High Hill, and the subsequent betrayal at that battle. I mean, just hammer home the betrayal. Hammer home how quickly everything falls apart. Hammer home how quickly it all happens. And yeah, I mean, that's the big thing for me, is this should be chaotic and confusing as soon as they see that the enemy reenactors are wielding actual weapons. That should be a big deal. That should be a big moment. And when we get into the actual battles and how they are mapped out, when you look at the maps, you'll see this like fancy bordering around the edges. That's what's known as the fray when it's describing the battle. It is very important that you make sure that your players understand the fray, the concept of it, and the function that it serves. Because basically, that's where the rest of the battle is happening. And for this particular fight, if a player character enters the fray, or any creature, rather, the fray for the first time on a turn or starts its turn there, must succeed on a DC 16 dexterity saving throw or take 2d6 slashing damage from other foes in the battle. The fray cannot be damaged and remains there until the end of the battle. It's a border to keep the player characters focused on the battle that they're supposed to be focused on and not trying to run off into the battlefield because it's chaos, there's too much going on, and they'll get wrecked. They'll take damage if they try to run into the fray, so don't. So that's a really cool concept. I like that for doing individual battles in the context of a larger battle. I think that's really smart, but make sure that your players understand it. All right, moving to the next section, citing the enemy. The Draconians, once again, the player characters can encounter more Draconians. Once again, have them be an alien, incomprehensible threat. Even if the players have encountered them before in Scales of War, the reports of them should confuse and confound literally everyone else. Nobody else should understand, they should dismiss them as lizard folk. They should, just do not have anybody acknowledge that the Draconians are an actual real thing, because they should be something that is not even possible. So once again, hammer that home. Okay, in the section for Cudgel's report, you have Jaev, who's the lieutenant of Cudgel's band, confirm the presence of the army that the player characters just spent a whole recon mission going and tracking down and finding, which to me is redundant. It kind of makes the PC's actions it seems like they didn't need to go do the thing that they did because Jaev was going to be here to just reinforce that. So I would honestly cut that bit, or maybe have him, rather than confirming that he saw the army too, maybe say, oh, I saw tracks in the section east of there that corroborates the idea that, yeah, that's probably where the army marched through. Good thing you actually went and saw the actual army, and so we understand the threat that we're dealing with. Something like that to make the player characters it seem more like they did something important. Okay, as soon as Lord Baccharis comes into go full pompous aristocrat with Baccharis. This is your chance to really have fun making a character that your players want to punch in the face. And so really relish that opportunity, enjoy that opportunity, because it can be a lot of fun to play that character. And so just, ramp it up, ham it up with Baccharis. Okay, so when the messenger shows up from the dragon army outside of the town and basically says you have to provide quarter to the Dragon Queen's army or else we're going to destroy you, yada, yada, yada. The player characters are going to try to kill the messenger. At least in my experience, that's definitely going to happen. So that's a potential problem. And having it says provide 4 other members of the dragon army attack anyone that tries to harm the messenger or leave the village. But then you're just in a combat encounter. You have 5 members of the dragon army plus a warhorse against the player characters, and now you're just in a normal combat session, which doesn't feel cool or unique. The messenger should be respected. That's how we conduct ourselves in war, etc., etc. So attacking a messenger is an abhorrent behavior, something that should be punished even by the bad guys. So what I would do, and once again, this depends on the nature of your campaign. There might be some tables that this would never fly at. I think I could get away with it at my table, and it would be a good, impactful moment. Set up the messenger thing. Maybe the gates are open. The player characters are out there talking, but the gates are open behind them, and there are villagers trying to see what's going on, peeking their head around, etc. And, if the party moves to attack the messenger, the 4 dragon army soldiers that are there don't throw javelins at the players. They throw javelins into the crowd, and they continue to do so, or give them bows and arrows, and they start fighting. As long as they are threatening the messenger, they're going to kill villagers, and that most of the time will stop the player characters in their tracks, because now it's not you're attacking me and I can defend myself. It's you're attacking innocent people. That's not fair. And it's they're not interested. You're not playing fair. This guy's a messenger. You're not supposed to kill messengers. There's a whole saying about it. So you stop playing unfair and they'll stop playing unfair. Deal? And that could be an excellent way to stop them from attacking the messenger. From the preparing for the worst section, all the way to the enemy sighted section. So this whole page, and there's a lot of little encounters and things that the player can do to get the town ready for evacuation and the attack and all that kind of stuff. I'm assuming most of you have seen this movie. If not, go watch it. Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. The build up to Helm's Deep, when they're there and they're sharpening weapons and talking and strategizing and planning, and just the tension that everybody feels during that whole stretch of the movie, to the point where, you know, Aragorn starts shouting that he's going to die as one of them. And that's a real bummer for everyone. Give it that feeling, give it that vibe of just constant tension, constant bleakness. We're not going to survive this. These villagers are not soldiers, and we have to find a way to get out of this village now. And then when Becklin's Fears is a whole section where Becklin kind of pulls the party aside and says, like, we can't survive this. Like, we have to get out. That can be that cool Legolas Aragorn moment where maybe one of the player characters is adamant that no, we stand and fight. And Becklin, being the wise wise knight, is like, you know, like, we will all die, and try to convince the player characters to evacuate. And then convince the mayor to evacuate, because the mayor also does not want to evacuate. And then once we get to the enemy side, we get our first little sidebar. We had one in the prelude section, but I didn't cover it because it was like the tutorial. But we have our first Warriors of Krynn Scenario 1 sidebar. And so it basically says you can run this section two different ways. You can do the Warriors of Krynn battle and then jump on ahead, or you can do the Invasion of Vogler section, which gives more like personal, direct combat encounters for the player characters. For this particular fight, if you have the option, I'd do both. I would provide both the scope of the battle and the personal perspectives. If you don't want to do all of the Invasion of Vogler scenarios, I would say the Ominous Riders section, which is where the player characters get their first sight of Lord Soth, is mandatory. Even if you're not going to run anything else, run the Ominous Riders encounter, which is literally just them, the character who has the highest passive perception. So it's not even a check, just whichever who has the highest passive perception, you see this thing. And I like that because it makes them feel special for having a high passive perception, but there's not actually a DC attached to it, so you know that they're going to see the thing. But I would personally run all of them because they're all really cool encounters. But also, since I have the Warriors of Krynn, I would run Scenario 1 as well. And everybody gets to participate in that. It is designed to be run alongside that. It's designed to where it can be run alongside this with a full party. I'll just put it that way. Okay, and then the Escape from Vogler section, when the player characters encounter the Boiler Drake, which is like a big boiler that's also the shape of a dragon with 4 draconians in it. It should be confusing and scary. And what is this thing? Once again, like, the player characters should be encountering a lot of these things for the very first time. And if you want to have them make things like fear checks, which there are rules for that in the Dungeon Master's Guide, I would wholeheartedly encourage that, because that really gives you that feeling of an unknown enemy invading your world, and how terrifying that can be when you see things that you've never even conceptualized of before. So yeah, I would have both the player characters and the villagers panic, be shocked, and confused by the Boiler Drake. And once again, the invasion encounters all the way through until the final boat section, which is here, should just be a non-stop gauntlet. Like, just encounter after encounter after encounter after encounter as they're desperately trying to fight their way through the city to get to the docks, to get on a boat. And, you know, the map is right there at the docks. So when they encounter the Boiler Drake, they're right there, which will make them think this is the final encounter. The Boiler Drake is this, like, terrifying siege engine with 4 terrifying monsters in it, and we have to take that down before we can get on the boat. Surely this is where we pull out all the stops. This is where we blow our highest level spell slots. This is where we blow all of our once per long rest character features. And then Viewmaster Golghag kicks down a wall. And that should be a, come on, really? Like, not another encounter. We're not ready for this. That should be, boom, hi, let's fight. And I love the structure of that, a build. This is the final encounter, and then nope, one more. So I really like the pacing of this section. I think you should lean into that and have that be the like doubled over hands on knees, like, no, I can't do another one. And you do another one. That would be a really fun button to end a session on, is like defeating the Boiler Drake. And the players are thinking that you're going to describe them getting on the boat. And it's like, nope. Actual boss shows up on the scene, and that's where we'll call the session. We'll pick it up next time. And you'll have people like groaning and freaking out over it, which will be a lot of fun. The Lost in Battle section at the very end talks about the fate of Jaev, or actually Jaev gets to the boats, but it's like his motivation. Is he secretly a bad guy? Is he a good guy, etc.? The fates of Becklin and Cudgel. I would keep Becklin alive. Even in the assassination option where Jaev's a bad guy and he betrayed Becklin and killed her, I would have that assassination attempt have failed. And Becklin has instead been taken prisoner by the Dragon Queen army. And I would hold on to Becklin until the Sunward Fortress, which is in the Northern Wastes, which will be covered in this next video. I would hold on to Becklin until then and have her be a prisoner, possibly with a slot egg in her, if you have the right party composition where they can have multiple uses of lesser restoration, because then that can be a big moment where they rescue their former mentor, their mentor that they thought was dead. Yeah, I would play up that Becklin is dead. Have Jaev, regardless of his allegiances, claim that like the battle turned against them. I think Becklin is dead. I think I saw the army overrun her, etc. But instead they took her prisoner and they're going to use her for these horrible experiments. You get the gist. But keep Becklin alive. Have her come back later on down the road. Have the PCs rescue her. So then it's that, once again, we're talking about classic story tropes, classic story beats, that inversion where the former students have now risen to enough power to rescue their former mentor, and they are now on equal footing. They are peers as opposed to being the mentor-mentee dynamic. And now Shadow of War, maybe one of my favorite pieces of art in the whole book. It's so pretty. So Shadow of War, it gives you a little bit on Kalaman and the city at the forefront. The guild leaders, which make up the city council, the council of the city, they are given the noble stat block, which is fine. Build them out, give a couple of them personalities, make a couple of them named NPCs that the player characters can interact with. They have motivations and flaws and etc. Because down the road, and down the road I mean like very shortly, next exit later on in this chapter, they're all gonna die, and it's gonna have more impact if more than one of them, because the governor is there and the governor has a name and motivations, all that stuff. But if you have multiple people that maybe different party members attach themselves to and really liked, then that's a bigger moment. That's more impactful, obviously. So build out the city council a bit more and give them those personalities, write it all down, have it ready to go. Once again, the name of the game, and throughout a lot of this video, is take your time. Take your time in the refugee camp. Once the players are with the people of Vogler on the riverbank and they're trying to figure out what happened, they're trying to tend to their wounded, they're trying to heal their sick, let that moment breathe. There's survivor camp hardships where it's a 1d4 roll. No, just do all 4 of them. Because it gives the player characters a chance to interact with these people, that you could even replace some of the people on this table with villagers that had names that you created that they interacted with. But the survivor camp hardships, like youngsters struggle to land their boat. The boat is 20 feet from the shore and drifting away. Character who swims to the boat can pilot successfully with a DC 14 survival check. An older refugee slipped in the shallow water and sprained an ankle. Character can make a medicine check, expending 1 use of their healer's kit or any use of magic that restores hit points. Couple sit shivering beside an unlit stack of firewood, staring off in the direction of Vogler. You can light the fire for them. Two rowdy youths take advantage of the chaos to try and rob a disliked neighbor. Character can stop them with an intimidation check. So once again, these are things that you can interact with these people that you've hopefully grown to care about and further help them and further establish the players and their characters as the heroes of this village. Once again, you had a side quest to get Darrett some armor from Becklin wanted you to go grab a box. If you did that, then you have some Knights of Solamnia armor to give to Darrett. You can say this is from Becklin, and he should be touched on a fundamental level when given this armor. This should mean the world to him, and he should think very highly of both Becklin and you all, or your players, for doing this for him. And this is the beginning of his journey that to become a hero, the hero of his own story. And if any of the player characters are Knights of Solamnia, they've taken that initial background, that initial feat, then he should take a special interest in them. He should try to walk beside them, not literally, but just follow their path. And try to live up to the Knights of Solamnia. Okay, so the next section of the adventure is the player characters go into town and they go meet with the council, but Lord Baccharis is there and he's trying, and this is where is written in the adventure, the player characters meet him for the first time. I think you understand why meeting him before in this context is important. Like knowing him as the jerk of Vogler will enforce this interaction and kind of continue to let the player character's blood boil, because he is there, he got their head, they have an interaction with his son being a jerk as usual, but he's basically trying to say that he was the hero of the village, he is the de facto leader of the village, they have decided that he represents the town and has come to discuss taking back Vogler and all this stuff and really puffing himself up. Player characters can obviously undercut him and dispute his claims, but when the council decides to discuss what to do with the refugees from Vogler, they ask the player characters to leave them, and Darrett to leave them, but Baccharis stays. That, if your players are anything like mine, is going to make them very angry and potentially take that anger out on the governor and the council, which I think as a DM, you should allow the governor and council to give grace to the PCs because they are part of this group of refugees that have just landed on their shore clear. They're under a lot of stress, a lot of duress, and so they're going to lash out. I would not have the governor or any members of the council hold a grudge against the PCs for them being angry at being asked to leave while Baccharis stays. Still have them be firm that Baccharis gets to stay and they need to leave, but allow them to give grace to the PCs in this moment. The offer to join the military, which is kind of we will support your people, but in exchange we need the player characters and Darrett to join the military essentially, and for a shortened stint just to deal with this looming threat, and that's the exchange, is essentially what the offer is. It says that only one player character really needs to sign up for it in order for the deal to be made good. And if they all refuse, then Darrett kind of pulls them aside, like, I'm going to do it. It'd be cool if I had your all support in that. But this is something that I think you should prime your players for in session 0. Make it clear that this adventure involves war and battles and military action, and emphasize that the players should make characters that would want to or would be willing to join a military for some reason, whether that's altruistic nobility or selfish ambition. Like either one works, but prime your players to make characters that would be willing to take this offer. It's just going to make your life easier as a DM. It's going to make their lives easier as players to interact with this adventure in a meaningful way. So that's what I would say, is just prime your players for it in session 0 so that you don't have a whole lot of friction at this point in the adventure. The Eye in the Sky section has come back around for the message for a mage. They have a golden scroll that they're supposed to deliver. Remind your players. Remind them that there's somebody in Kalamon that they need to take this scroll to. They've been through a lot. They might have forgotten. They might be at the very beginning of their notes that they haven't checked in a long time because it's part of the prelude. So yeah, just remind them, those players, like, hey, you got a little side quest that you need to do. And then for this section, here's how I'd run it. So the adventure is written. This book is written. Level 1, you get a bonus feat. Level that is either based on your background, or you can pick between skilled or toughened if you don't take one of the Dragonlance specific backgrounds. But essentially, you're either on the high sorcery path or the Knight of Solamnia path. At level 4, which we are past level 4 at this point, I believe. Let me double check the adventure flow at the beginning. Chapter 4, Shadow of War, for 4th to 5th level characters. So we are 4th level at this point, but we have become 4th level. So we would have already picked feats. And the adventure says you get a bonus feat at 4th level, and recommends that if you're on the high sorcery or the Knights of Solamnia path that you pick for your bonus feat, the white robe, black robe, red robe, crown, thorn, or no, not crown, rose, or sword. Yeah. Feats to solidify your placement on that path. I've already gone into my review why I don't like that in concept, but we're in much more practical, like you're doing it, so be it via feats. So how would we run it? I would hold off on the bonus feats. I would just let them level as normal when they hit 4th level at the end of the last chapter. And then this moment, when they finish the message for a mage, I would tell the arcane characters, the ones that did the Eyes in the Sky prelude, okay, you can take a bonus feat that is the black, white, or red robe based on whatever you were told was the recommendation. That's the feat that you get. And then for the reporting for duty section, which is the very next section, that's when everyone else gets their bonus feat, because they are solidified in the military, they get briefed, etc. So if they're a knight, then they can do that. If they're not a knight, they can take one of the specific organization bonus feats to represent their military training, even though they're just being... It's conceptual, but that's how I would run it at my table. Hold off. Don't tell them, hey, you get a bonus feat at 4th level. Wait until this moment and then give them the bonus feat like a piece of loot. And then after the reporting for or as part of the reporting for duty section, when they're at the castle and they've been briefed and everything, and Derek shows up, have this be the first turning point of him seeming more capable. Have him be in the armor. Have him be walking a little bit taller. Have him be trying to live up to the armor in his new position as a member of the Kalaman military. And he has a lot of stuff to tell them, so make him seem capable. Make him seem like he's trying. Not trying too hard, like he's trying. So he's not, his feet aren't quite big enough to fill the shoes, but he's getting there. Once again, just reinforcing taking our time. And the adventure should really be in waves, if that makes sense. Like, you start up here with the preludes, like Scales of War, you're fighting, or Eyes in the Sky, you're like undergoing this test and all this stuff. And then it comes down and you're in Vogler, you're at the funeral, then the betrayal happens, then the messenger, then, oh no, we're being invaded, and we're up here, and then we escape the town, we're on the riverbank, we're in Kalaman, things are calmed down, and then we're part of the military, and we're being sent on our first adventure. I know you can't see my hand right now, but it's going back up. You can tell by my arm. And so just have it ebb and flow like that. It will feel better as an adventure. The players will enjoy it more, in my opinion. The fight outside Rukeldust's shop, which is the gnome that made the boiler drake, you're going to investigate it. Have this be a much needed moment of levity. Have this fight be fun. There's some wackiness going on with the Clockwork Chaos table and like little robot things. Like there's a robot chicken that can fire 10 eggs at a character, and the egg bursts into an oily mess, and you have disadvantage on attack rolls. That's funny. It's frustrating, but it's funny. Have this be a lighthearted moment, because this adventure is about to get really dark in a few pages. So really emphasize the wackiness of this adventure. You're even fighting goblins and a hobgoblin. You're not fighting draconians. Like, this is a kind of classic silly D&D adventure. Also, you have all these missions for Kalaman right here. This basically this whole page, and this, yeah, from here to here is all just individual missions that you can go on. And it says you could do whatever you want. Like, you could do some of them, you could do all of them. I would do all of them. Once again, we need to solidify Kalaman as this place that we care about. And I would double down on that by sprinkling in downtime in between the missions. Let the players explore the town. Let them go to the tavern. Let them see Bakaris being a jerk. All this stuff. Let them breathe in Kalaman. Let them have time to enjoy the city so that down the road, when they need to protect the city, they care about the city, they care about the people, and have them take like the guild or the city council members are guild leaders. Have them go to these guilds. Maybe there's a thieves guild and your rogue wants to join, and so they go and sit down with the guild leader and talk about like, you know, admittance and all that stuff. That can be really fun. And when the bad stuff happens, it will be more impactful. For the Wheelwatch Outpost, you have a force led by the former mayor of Vogler. They no longer go by mayor because they don't have a town to be mayor of, so they just go by Raven now. They're leading a force to go take the Wheelwatch Outpost, and with some villagers from Vogler. And Darrett asks you all to help in that endeavor. And you go sneak up on Wheelwatch Outpost. You try to open the gates, all that kind of stuff. Have some villagers that the player characters know as part of the army that Raven is leading. Have it be more impactful that, yeah, we know a lot of people in this army, so the stakes are higher for us to do well on this scouting mission and trying to make sure the gates are open and helping to retake the outpost. You have your first encounter of a Dragonelle in this section of the adventure. Even more terrifying than the Draconians. This is like an escalation. It's like, that looks like an actual dragon. Oh my god. Like, what? There aren't dragons. What are you talking about? That's not a dragon. Looks like a dragon. Probably a dragon. Oh, we're all gonna die. So emphasize how scary the Dragonelle is. And in the next section, so once you get back, you learn that Lord Baccharis led a contingency to the Steel Springs to go try to defeat them, and it's gone poorly, and Darrett is with them, and Darrett like basically leaves a note like, please come help. Don't ignore the battlefield events when you're doing your little fight here. This is scenario 4 for the Warriors of Krynn. I skipped over, there were scenarios 2 and 3 as part of the missions section. Do those. If you have the Warriors of Krynn, just do the battlefield scenarios anytime they come up. But Warriors of Krynn scenario 4 is here. But in addition to that, you can do an actual fight on the battlefield with your player characters. That's kind of after the battle. And so I would do both, because this is like the aftermath where you have wounded soldiers trying to retreat and the player characters intervene to try and give them a clear path to get away. But you have battlefield events over here. Don't ignore these, because some of them are wild. You can have more soldiers come onto the field that you need to protect. You could have one of them fall over, and so any other wounded soldiers that are trying to escape that are within 10 feet of them stop also, because they go to rush to pick them up, so they stop moving for a round. Or you have a Dragonelle flying overhead and dropping a Kalamon soldier that dies on impact next to one of the player characters. It ramps up that sense of dynamic flow and chaos of a battlefield. So be sure to do the battlefield events. And then afterwards, you find Darrett riding with the rest of the command. He has basically taken over the army's retreat. Have the horrors of this failed battle be a growth moment for Darrett, where it's really hardened him to the realities of war. And so a little bit of that sparkle is gone. He's becoming a more stoic, thoughtful leader, as opposed to the bright-eyed, excitable young man that he was earlier in this chapter. And then when they get back, some Knights of Solamnia have showed up. They're not really Knights of Solamnia. It's a really bad thing that's about to happen. But play it up as hopeful. Like, people don't really trust the Knights of Solamnia, but any help is better than nothing at this point. So yeah, we have some Knights of Solamnia. They're here to help. They're trained soldiers. They have fought things before. Holy crap, we might just make it. So really ramp that up. And when they encounter the two that are standing guard, they're actually wraiths. And the way it's written just leaves too much white space from a narrative design standpoint for my liking, in that it's like, obviously the player characters are meant to notice that something's wrong at some point, try to get past the wraiths, and then they attack them. And then once they've dealt 10 damage, then the disguises are broken up enough to reveal the skeletal visage of the wraiths, and then they know, oh, okay, we need to fight these people. But the ramp up to that, I could see stalling out pretty quickly with the wrong party, where they're just like, oh, okay, well, they don't want us to go past, so I guess we'll wait. The governor, we'll let the governor know that we're here. They'll come. They're not going to come. So have them experience like a bad gut feeling. Maybe somebody with the highest passive perception notices something. Or what I think would be really cool is, back in the earlier chapter, in chapter 3, when you're in Vogler, have Becklin establish something. like a call and response phrase common amongst the Knights of Solamnia. She's teaching it to Darrett, or if one of the player characters is on that path, have her do it with them. And now the players have some ammunition when they interact with these knights that are acting kind of shady. They can invoke this call and response, and when they don't respond, they know these are imposters. These aren't really knights. We need to do something. The Council Massacre should be the turning point of the adventure. Not the chapter, the adventure. This is when things get dark, which is why we needed the Clockwork Chaos encounter earlier to be a lot of fun. Because, yeah, if you played this up right, the governor's death and the council members that you fleshed out should be devastating. Because the player characters went off to go do something else. They weren't here to protect them. And it reinforces and kind of reveals the idea that nowhere is safe from the Dragon Queen's army. You're in this town, this ancient town with walls. It's fortified. There's guards. They have their own militia. And none of that was enough to protect the most powerful people in this town. That should be terrifying and sad. And Caradoc. Make Caradoc as memorable as you can through voice, mannerisms, whatever you can lock into in terms of a memorable, distinct, and somewhat disturbing voice and mannerisms. Like, I oftentimes will go into like Heath Ledger's Joker, that very over enunciated and very aggressive pattern of speech, something like that, to give them this otherworldly feeling and kind of terrifying way of talking that will just stick in your players' heads, so that down the road, because they know by the end of this encounter that Caradoc is possessing, they're a ghost that's possessing the body of someone else. The next time they show up possessing someone else, it can be an instant libel moment of like, oh no, I recognize that voice. Yay! Which they will show up later on, but we'll get into that in the next video. So, yeah, the rated Catacombs section is extremely well written. It tells the story of a version of the story of Lord Soth through Cataclysm Fire as you enter each room, showing vignettes of his downfall. And so, I mean, just take your time in describing these things. Don't let your players rush through room to room. Say as you enter the room, purple fire emerges before you, and describe the scene that plays out. Take your time with it. And other than that, I don't have a whole lot of input for the rated Catacombs section because it is very well written. And I think that you get a lot of really good lore here. This is all for you. But that gives you information to carry forward. And most of that information, it's afforded the opportunity to be presented here in the actual adventure. So yeah, just be sure to read through all of this, the backstory for the rated Catacombs, and then just take your time describing the different vignettes in the Cataclysm Fire, and have the fight. And that's it for the first half of Shadows of the Dragon Queen How to Run. Let me know what you all thought down below. Be sure to comment. Let me know what you think of the adventure. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to tune in for part 2, and I will see you next time.